Let me ask you a simple question. Have you ever tried to save money and somehow ended up spending more? Not all at once, not in some obvious way, but slowly over time, in a way that's hard to notice until it's already happened. Because for a lot of people, the cheapest option doesn't actually save money, it just feels like it does. Mark and Jenna learned this the annoying way. It started with something small. Their vacuum cleaner stopped working. Nothing dramatic, it just lost power and started making a weird noise. They looked up repairs, but the cost didn't make sense. So they did what most people do. They went online and bought a cheaper replacement. Nothing fancy, just something that would get the job done. It worked, for a while. A few months later, the same problem showed up again. Less suction, more noise, and eventually it gave up completely. Now they had a choice. Spend more upfront on something reliable, or just replace it again. They chose the cheaper option, again. Because in the moment, it felt like the smart decision. And that's the illusion. Saving money upfront feels responsible. It feels disciplined. It feels like you're doing the right thing. But what matters isn't just how much you spend today. It's how many times you end up spending it. Think about it like this. You buy a $30 item that lasts 3 months, or you buy a $90 item that lasts 2 years. On the surface, $30 feels like the better deal. Less money leaving your account right now. But over time, you're replacing that $30 item again, and again, and again. And before you realize it, you've spent more than the person who paid $90 once and moved on. Same need, same product, completely different outcome. And this doesn't just apply to random purchases. It shows up everywhere. Clothes that wear out faster, shoes that fall apart, electronics that slow down or break just outside warranty. The cheaper option doesn't just save you money, it often locks you into a cycle of replacing things more often than you should. Now, to be fair, this isn't always about bad decisions. Sometimes it's about what you can afford in the moment. Because when money is tight, paying more upfront isn't just uncomfortable, it's impossible. So you go with what fits your budget right now, even if you know it's not the best long-term move. And this is where the illusion gets deeper. Because the system quietly rewards people who can spend more upfront. They get durability, they get reliability. They get to avoid the hassle of constantly replacing things. Meanwhile, everyone else ends up paying in installments. Just not the kind you expect. Not monthly payments. Repeated purchases. Mark and Jenna didn't notice it at first. Each decision made sense on its own. A cheaper appliance here, a lower cost option there, nothing extreme. But over time, those decisions started stacking. And what looked like saving money slowly turned into spending more than they ever planned. And the wild part? That's just the surface. Because once you look beyond everyday purchases, the same pattern starts showing up in places that cost a lot more than a vacuum cleaner. And that's where things get really expensive. That same pattern shows up in decisions that carry a lot more weight. Take cars. Buying a used car for a lower price can feel like a smart financial move. And sometimes it is. But when that car starts breaking down every few months, the math changes quickly. Repairs pile up, parts fail, time gets wasted. And suddenly, that cheap car isn't cheap anymore. It's unpredictable. Or think about something as simple as your phone. You go for the budget option. It works fine at first. But after a year, it slows down. Battery life drops. Apps don't run the same way. So you replace it sooner than expected. Meanwhile, someone who paid more upfront might still be using the same device years later without thinking about it. Again, same category, different long-term cost. And then there are situations where cheap doesn't just cost more money, it costs opportunity. Imagine Mark gets an interview for a better job, higher pay, better hours, real upgrade. But his laptop is unreliable. It crashes during video calls, freezes at the worst times. Now it's not just an inconvenience, it's a risk. Because sometimes the cheaper option doesn't just fail you, it fails you at the worst possible moment. This is where the illusion really breaks. Because saving money isn't just about spending less, it's about spending in a way that reduces future costs. And the cheaper option often does the opposite. It pushes those costs forward. You see it in housing too. Lower rent can mean longer commutes, more time spent traveling, higher transportation costs, less flexibility. So while the rent looks cheaper on paper, the total cost of living isn't. And all of this creates a pattern that's easy to miss. The cheaper option solves the immediate problem, but it often creates a future problem. And when those future problems stack up, they end up costing more than the original expensive option ever would have. Mark and Jenna started noticing this shift, not in one big moment, but in small realizations, things breaking sooner than expected, replacing items more often than they should, paying again for something they thought they had already solved. Each time, it didn't feel like a big deal, but together, it started to feel like they were running in place. And that's when a bigger question starts to form. If the cheaper option keeps costing more over time, why does it feel like the only option so many people can take? Because the answer to that question has nothing to do with price tags alone. Because the real cost isn't just measured in dollars, it's measured in timing. When you have money, you get to choose when you pay. When you don't, you pay whenever life forces you to. Think about that for a second. If something breaks and you have savings, you can fix it properly, replace it once, move on. But if you don't, you patch it, delay it, find the quickest solution just to get through the week. And those quick fixes almost always come back. This shows up in ways that don't look obvious at first. Skipping regular maintenance because it feels expensive right now, only to deal with a much bigger repair later. Putting off a medical check because it's inconvenient, only for it to turn into something more serious down the line. Ignoring small problems because they're manageable, until they're not. In the moment, these decisions make sense. You're not choosing the worst option. You're choosing the option that keeps things stable today. But over time, those temporary solutions start stacking, and they turn into permanent costs. Mark and Jenna felt this in subtle ways. They weren't making reckless choices. They were adjusting, spacing out expenses, delaying upgrades, working around problems instead of solving them fully. Because solving things the right way usually required one thing they didn't always have available in the moment: extra cash. And that's the part nobody really talks about. The cheaper option often isn't cheaper. It's just delayed. You're not avoiding the cost. You're pushing it forward. Sometimes that means paying twice. Sometimes it means paying more. And sometimes it means paying at the worst possible time. Which is why, for a lot of people, saving money doesn't feel like progress. It feels like a constant trade-off between what's affordable now and what's actually better long-term. And once you start seeing it that way, the whole idea of just buy the cheaper option starts to fall apart. Because cheap isn't always about saving money, sometimes. It's just the most expensive decision you can make. And here's where it really gets frustrating, and honestly, a little unfair. Because the cheap illusion isn't just about products or appliances. It creeps into almost every part of daily life, quietly draining money in ways most people never notice until it's too late. Take subscriptions. You might think that skipping a premium plan saves you money, but then limited features force you to buy add-ons or pay late fees. Or maybe the free version makes you spend more time fixing problems yourself. That time, if valued like money, ends up costing you far more than the $10 a month you would have paid up front. Or consider transportation again. Mark and Jenna realized that taking the cheapest rideshare or relying on an older car wasn't really saving them. Delays meant missing appointments, extra trips to the store, or minor accidents that led to repairs. Individually, each event felt small, manageable even, but stacked together, it added hundreds of dollars a month that could have been avoided with one smarter upfront choice. Even everyday groceries fall into this pattern. Buying small portions or choosing cheaper brands seems smart at the checkout, but you often run out faster, go back to the store more frequently, and sometimes waste food because the smaller quantity goes bad before you can use it. That save a few dollars today decision quietly costs more in both money and time than it appears on the surface. And it's not always obvious why this happens. Humans are wired to see immediate savings as good. I spent $20 instead of $80. Look how much I saved. But the brain rarely calculates the cost of repeating that decision 3, 4, or 5 times over the next year. That's where the illusion is strongest. Cheap feels like smart, but only until the long-term math is applied. Mark and Jenna eventually started to see the pattern in their own lives. It wasn't one catastrophic purchase or a single moment of overspending. It was a lifetime of small choices, each seemingly logical in the moment, quietly stacking up into a bigger problem. Replacing a cheap vacuum, patching a car part instead of upgrading, choosing a budget phone that died too soon, all these savings were silently eating their budget. And it goes beyond money. It eats time, mental energy, and peace of mind. Every quick fix or temporary solution demands attention later, or worse, creates stress they could have avoided. Their lives became a constant balancing act, reacting to problems instead of planning ahead, always chasing stability instead of building it. But here's the critical takeaway. The cheap illusion isn't about being careless. It's not about being bad at money. Most people making these choices are doing their absolute best with what they have in the moment. The problem isn't them, it's how the system rewards upfront capital and penalizes lack of it. Having less money often means paying more, in both obvious and subtle ways. Understanding this changes everything. It reframes the way you think about purchases, about budgeting, and about priorities. Sometimes, spending a little more today is actually the smartest move you can make, because it saves money, time, and stress in the long run. And that ultimately is the lesson Mark and Jenna learned the hard way. They started noticing patterns before they became crises. They began weighing long-term value over short-term savings. They asked themselves, does this choice really save me, or is it just pushing the cost down the road? And slowly, they started breaking the cycle. Not by suddenly making huge amounts of money, but by making smarter, more intentional choices. So, if you've ever felt like you're stuck in a loop, always choosing the cheaper option, always trying to save, but somehow never getting ahead, this is why. Being cheap isn't inherently bad, but ignoring the long-term cost of your decisions can quietly make you spend more than you realize. It's not just a lesson about money. It's a lesson about awareness, about thinking 2 steps ahead, about understanding that saving isn't always about cutting costs. It's about maximizing value over time. So next time you're tempted by the cheaper option, pause for a second. Ask yourself, will this actually save me money? Or is it just the illusion of saving? Because once you see the pattern, it changes how you make decisions forever. Mark and Jenna's story is a reminder that being smart with money isn't always about having more. It's about seeing clearly, thinking ahead, and recognizing the hidden costs of being cheap. If this video gave you a new perspective, hit that like button, subscribe for more insights, and drop a comment sharing the cheap trap that's caught you before. Because understanding the illusion is the first step to escaping it. Remember, sometimes spending a little more today is the smartest move you can make tomorrow.